and the forces that move them. Today, the next panel will be moderated by Laura Davis. She is an assistant professor of professional practice and digital news director of the Annenberg Media Center for the USC Annenberg School of Journalism and Communication. She previously worked as a reporter for the Associated Press, editor for Yahoo News, and deputy mobile editor for the Los Angeles Times. And she was on the team that developed and launched BuzzFeed News' award-winning BuzzFeed News app. So she is well equipped to moderate this terrific panel. Thank you, Laura, for being here.
Is it on?
Yeah, it might be.
Hello? Oh, it is on. I'm sorry. I'm Laura, and I'm going to introduce our panelists today for this technology, social media, and the forces that move them panel. To my right here is Karen North. She is a clinical professor of communication and director of the digital social media program here at USC Annenberg. She's worked in the Clinton administration, and she is also the executive director of Civil Politics, a nonprofit that uses technology to bridge the divide between practitioners and researchers in moral psychology.
That is not true.
Oh, that is not true? That's what I...
It's okay, I'll take it. That's
what
awesome. I'm happy to do that.
That's someone else.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Here.
You were right in the first part.
I have that on my bullet points. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Well,
you give me lots of credit for things I don't do.
Would that person please stand up?
I'm sorry. That's fake news.
Please pass it on.
I'm so sorry. And then to her right is Marty Kaplan. He is the Norman Lear Professor of Entertainment, Media, and Society at the USC Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. And he is also the founding director of the Norman Lear Center. He served in the Carter administration as a speechwriter to Vice President Walter Mondale and also helped manage his presidential campaign. And he also worked at Disney, where he was a screenwriter, and he wrote the political comedy The Distinguished Gentleman, which starred Eddie Murphy. And then over here we have Carla Marinucci, who is Politico's California playbook reporter and one of the most prominent California journalists. She was previously a senior political writer for the San Francisco Chronicle and the San Francisco Examiner. And she has covered presidential elections since 1996, and she's covered 4 California gubernatorial administrations. So thank you for being here, panelists. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
So we're going to start off with, I think, something that everyone in this discussion about social media and political discourse, something that I think is really relatable for most people, which is the rhetoric you see from friends and family probably in your Facebook newsfeed who can relate, right? Like probably everyone in this room. For me personally, it's like I'm getting married in June, and actually my parents are debating whether or not to invite longtime friends because of the rhetoric they see on Facebook from them and this political rhetoric and disagreements and stuff. So it's a very real and potent thing for all of us. But I want the panelists to talk a little bit about the aggregate effects of this new avenue for individual political expression. So talk a little bit about that and talk about the contrast between now and our pre-social media world.
Who's first?
Carla.
Well, I'm going to just talk from a reporter's point of view because, when I first started doing this back in 1996, the way to go out and try to determine where the public was at on stories was you'd go to the Walmart parking lot or the town square. You'd actually talk to people, and now this concept of the town square has changed. It is now the digital square. That's Neil Ferguson, the social historian at Hoover Institution, just wrote a great book about this. And I think when you realize how much time we're spending in this digital square. The studies show that in 2009, Americans used their phones maybe 195 days of the year. By 2016, there's average American is spending 5 hours a day on the phone. And this is a transformation of like who we are and how we connect with each other and how we have political discourse. And what's happening is the space, the distance is collapsing between us, and at the same time, there are higher levels of deception. There's higher levels of of false reporting. There's a lot of things to be concerned about, and I think we're seeing this in Facebook. We're seeing this in how campaigns use it, and there's a story out on Bloomberg today that says how in terms of political campaigns and how they used it, an internal white paper published by Facebook, and this is today, shows that the company's data supports the fact that the Trump campaign used the digital space much more effectively at advertising tools than the Hillary Clinton campaign did. And one way that they did that was 84% of the time in their messaging to folks out there, they had an ask. They prompted the social media folks to either donate or to take action in their campaign. And the Clinton campaign only did that about 50% of the time. So we're seeing differences in the way campaigns use social media, and we're seeing how now what's happening in terms of this Facebook issue. Just as we were coming here, Facebook came out with a statement today talking about, I think it's like at least 5 or 6 different points of how they're going to address this whole issue with regard to data breach by Cambridge Analytica. And I just talked to Senator Feinstein yesterday on this and said, we have Mark Zuckerberg coming before Congress next week. I said, what are you going to ask him? And she said, I want to know what he's going to do about this and how he's going to make sure it doesn't happen again. And those are big questions, that all of us are going to be watching. Coming from Silicon Valley, where I lived and cover every day, I don't know, my impression is, just as a reporter, a lot of the social media companies, whether it's Twitter, which is right downtown San Francisco, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Google, all in my realm, a lot of the folks who work in these companies, brilliant as they are, live in sort of a bubble and don't understand how average people are seeing them and these data breaches and how it's going to affect all of us.
So the question of what are the aggregate effects of technology and social media? There is an academic journal called the Journal of Democracy. In 2010, it ran an article called Liberation Technology, kind of an allusion to liberation theology. In 2016, they ran an article called Can Democracy Survive the Internet? So, which kind of puts bookends on how we think things are going. When you ask about what the effects are, there are things that everybody knows. So everybody knows that polarization is in effect. Everybody knows that filter bubbles arise. Everybody knows that misinformation permeates because of the internet. Tribal epistemology and a world of opinion and separate from not understanding the line between opinion and facts. And what's interesting is that, in fact, nobody knows that. We all say that. But I just spent an interesting few days trying to look at the studies of studies. And as it turns out, in the last few weeks, 2 huge studies of studies came out. One from the Hewlett Foundation, which has just announced they're putting $10 million in an effort to combat this, and the other, a group of, I think it was 17 scientists social scientists and natural scientists who wrote a piece for Science magazine, the premier journal of the sciences. And they went through what it is that we don't know. And the answer is we don't know anything. All of these things that I've talked about are conjectural, they're anecdotes, they're instincts, and they may be true, but there is no evidence for it. Just one quote from the Hewlett study. Although there is broad scholarly agreement about the high prevalence of misinformation and propaganda in online platforms, whether or not it has any impact on political outcomes, such as levels of political knowledge, trust in democratic institutions, or politicized political participation, remains an open question. So I've just given you matter and antimatter. But I have one other point, if I could.
Yeah, please.
When you talk about the internet, I think you cannot talk it, and social media, you cannot talk about it without reference to its business model, because social media is a business, and the platform may have biases built into it, but the business model, in my mind, is the key to the effects it makes. And what is the business model of social media? Its business model is to grab and hold your attention and to sell it to advertisers. That's what social media is for. It is not for making us better people. It's not for organizing popular insurrections in autocratic countries. It's not for anything except selling us to advertisers. What is the name of the business which grabs and holds your attention and sells it to advertisers? There's a word in English for something that grabs and holds your attention as a business. It's called entertainment. Social media is a branch of the entertainment industry. That's how I think it has to be understood. And then you ask, what does social media do to grab and hold your attention? It does the same things that the entertainment industry does. It uses things that we cannot resist because we have attention mechanisms which are both under our control and not in our control. So it uses fear, it uses sex, it uses novelty, it uses story. All these devices that you can see on a soap opera is also what YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram are using, because the moment you turn away, that's death to them.
Yeah, so you both hit on a couple points that I wanted to touch on today. And you were talking about the incentives, right? The incentives on social media from the business model perspective, but also something that is of interest to me is the incentives for the users and how they're there to, when it comes to political discourse, right? And when it comes to what we're saying on social media about politics, the main motivation for, I think, for a lot of people is not, oh, okay, so I want to be really factual and accurate. It's to express identity, right? And that's part of what we're seeing in the spread of misinformation is that the primary goal is to express identity, express your liberal, express your conservative, whatever. And so the facts become sort of secondary to that. So I'm wondering if you guys can weigh in on that a little bit.
Let me jump in and tie together some of the other stuff. By the way, my rule in life is never follow Marty because I'm always fascinated by what he says. So let me just comment, because you both brought up things related to these two things which also relate to this. So first of all, if you look at the situation right now, I agree with everything you said, both of you. Yeah. But the question is, what is Mark Zuckerberg going to say, and what questions are going to be asked of him in light of all of this? Right. And let's back up and say that when we were all kids, everybody watched the news, and then we went to the water cooler or the schoolyard and we discussed our opinions about the news. Okay, and you could argue whether the news was completely unbiased or not.
I don't know what your schoolyard was like. But
that was my schoolyard. So then, now we have the situation where we expect the news to come to us, and we expect it to come to us already as an opinion. Okay, so the problem is that now it's already, and we, as a psychologist, I have to say that everybody we have a confirmation bias. We have opinions, and we want to find evidence that supports our bias, and so we're already in a bind with that. And then social media makes that happen even more, because now that's how we receive the news. So there's that. And then you have things like Cambridge Analytica. You can talk about the data breach and all that. I'm not convinced that anything happened that was illegal. That's what's so interesting. I'm not convinced that the Russian meddling was illegal, because what it was buying ads. Okay? So they bought ads, and it's like, if you want to know best practices for using social media, go look at the Russian meddling, because it's probably just a list of best practices for reaching people based on their interests, their passions, and their prior behavior, and then trying to appeal to them. And then here's my other thing, just to tie it all together. So Mark Zuckerberg is going to go to the Hill, and Dianne Feinstein is going to want to nail him on some stuff. And I think that he has a is in a real bind. And here's his catch-22, okay? How many of you are on Facebook or have ever been on Facebook? Okay. Are you looking for news? Because he says you are. But I don't know anybody who looks for news or products or services on Facebook. You look for updates on your friends and family and pictures of what they're doing, where they vacationed, what the children and grandchildren or cousins have done, right? And then embedded in all that are multiple sponsored stories, which are, he would refer to news, but they're advertisements, okay? How many of you have ever clicked on those? Because maybe occasion, do you do it all the time? Probably not. Mark Zuckerberg knows that however many tens of millions of people saw those stories as they scrolled by, but I've heard nobody talk about how many people clicked on them, because my guess is that it is very, very few. But can Mark Zuckerberg say that to the Senate? If he says, look, nobody clicks on that stuff, then he's basically saying, don't buy ads on Facebook because they're not effective. Yeah. So there's a huge bind that involves the news. It involves how people are now polarized before they hear the original news, and they never hear the original news. And it involves the fact that people don't necessarily, that there is not the same kind of assumption that people have the same story and then they create opinions.
But a slightly more cynical take on the idea of going for identity expression or looking for news of friends and family and so on. You go on Facebook, you go on social media to get a squirt of dopamine. We are addicted to how we feel when someone likes, when we get a notification that someone has commented on something we do. So all those other things, all those functions, like being in touch with other people or being able to express your tribal identity, those are vehicles for getting that. They will provide us with anything that we want in order to stay there.
Including heated conversations,
sure,
because
great.
That's entertainment.
Yes.
And by the way, just like slightly off topic, but tangentially related, I'll tell you the other thing that is really scary to me, as having worked on the Hill and at the White House like you start, like, when you work there, you start thinking about things in terms of how our government functions. And the more we gerrymander and the more we create safe Republican and Democratic districts, the more we are electing people who don't go into the old rectangular districts and try to appeal to everybody. Instead, we have a safe Republican and a safe Democrat, and they don't have to appeal, they don't have to compromise, and they are more likely to be ideologues on their side. Now they've become a large percentage of the people in Congress, and they no longer have to compromise in Congress. They have to support their polarized, constituents, and now it's about outvoting each other, which I think is a terrible turn of events.
And I think we have to recognize we're giving Facebook everything they want every day by what we're looking at. And this is sort of the scary thing about it. I heard Joe Scarborough say this morning on MSNBC, that he had run a 9-minute mile and put it, and it was on his Apple Watch, and he started getting messages on Facebook about products for 50-year-old guys who run the 9-minute mile. And it's like,
Yeah.
Facebook admitted today, by the way, that it does screen your messages, the text messages that you're putting out. It also admitted today in this statement that came out just an hour or so ago, in total, we believe that Facebook information of up to 87 million people, mostly in the United States, may have been improperly shared with Cambridge Analytica. That's up 37 million people from the first analysis that was out there.
But how did Cambridge Analytica get the data? Do you guys know? They went in as a researcher. Because if you go
They bought the information from someone who went in as a researcher.
So if we go in as researchers, we have to go through the university IRB. We have to prove that everything we do is above board and that we're taking care of people. But these private company researchers are not always held to the same level, and Facebook was not careful about that. So they would be happy to this day to sell the same access as ads. But they gave away the
much as I would love to demonize Cambridge Analytica and the Trump campaign, the black box here is the assumption that exposure to a message makes a difference, that it changes our knowledge, changes our values, changes our behavior. We have no idea if that's true. We're acting as though it were true, and maybe it is, but we're jumping to that conclusion.
And you can make an equally compelling argument that the only thing that polarized people, the people who would make a difference in this, that people, because of the confirmation bias, people are more likely to click on something that agrees with them. And if it's extreme, then most of us in this room are not going to click on something extreme. It's the people who are already extreme that'll be drawn to it. They're already voting in that direction.
Laura, you asked one other question, is how is this different?
Yes, I did.
And if I can just
Please do. Go for it. Please, yeah.
There was a study that just came out. RAND did this study. They asked, so look at 3 other periods in history compared to now. They looked at the 1880s and 90s with a focus on print journalism, which was around. They looked at the 1920s and 30s, which added radio. They looked at the 60s and 70s, which added TV. And they looked at what they regard as the 4 fundamental consequences of media and technology. And what they found was that in the previous 3, the same things that are happening now were happening there. And those were a blurred line between fact and opinion, and increased relative volume of opinion over fact, to some degree declining trust in institutions as sources of fact. But the one thing that's different about now, and boy is it different, is that now also add in the fundamental disagreement over objective facts.
And I would also say the different thing about now is the rapidity at which information is shared. And I say this as somebody who's on Twitter, who uses it an awful lot. And I can tell you one experience I had was tweeting a story, a link, which to me looked completely legitimate. The story was Prince Harry is not going to invite Donald Trump to his wedding because he doesn't think Donald Trump is a good human being.
That's not true?
I retweeted this story, and I am not kidding. Within a matter of days, I would say 2 days, it had been retweeted 700,000 times. And I realized it was a phony story. It was not a true story. I mean, it's horrifying.
And how many of your real stories get 700,000 retweets?
Thank you. None of them do. I mean, and that is the horrifying and scary thing about it, you know. And what we're also saying is, I think this sort of arena creates personalities and spokespeople and who may never have succeeded in the past, in like the 1800s or even the 1950s.
Right.
You know, when you're talking about somebody like Milo Yiannopoulos, right?
Right.
Who he was recently at Berkeley. There was a big riot. Blah blah blah. You know, basically exists to create waves on social media.
Right.
And that kind of thing is also, as a media person, a little bit scary.
There was a study of what gets retweeted, what sentiments in a tweet are more likely to get it retweeted. And the top 2, which yours corresponds to, are novelty or surprise and disgust.
Right.
So
emotions either way.
Yeah. And by the way, there was a great study done, I want to say in the 70s, but I could be wrong, maybe the 80s, of they wanted to study back in the early days of reality TV when it was the Jerry Springer show. Do you guys remember the Jerry Springer show?
Yes.
I proudly say that I was not a watcher of the Jerry Springer show. Do you know what he did before he did his show? You probably know.
The congressman?
He was the mayor of Cincinnati.
Mayor. Yeah, that's
And it's
right. He was the mayor.
appalling to me that anybody in public life thought, oh, I work for the people, and now I'm going to show the dirty underbelly of the people. So they did a study. Again, I'm a psychologist. They did a study thinking, what are the personality factors that determine who will go on that show? And for those of you who don't know it, that was a show where people came and aired dirty laundry and said all kinds of horrible things about themselves and the people in their lives, right? And why would anybody do that on national TV? So they did a study, and there were all this speculation about what kinds of people it would be. And as it turns out, after doing a variety of analyses and then a meta-analysis, a study of the studies, it came down to literally one factor. Ready for what the factor was? Anger. Yeah. They were willing to look bad on TV in order to show how bad somebody else was. And it was basically just anger and vengeance.
And we
was the
were
only
willing
thing.
to watch it
Yeah.
because we love that.
Yeah, weirdly.
But hasn't that
I
worked?
don't.
Hasn't that worked in kind of a different way too, and maybe a positive way when you look at this whole young movement of young people with regard to gun safety? Overnight, David Hogg, Emma Gonzalez have become national spokespeople. I mean, I just checked it today. Emma Gonzalez, who's 17, has 1.5 million Twitter followers, which is amazing. In the day after, day or two after the Parkland shooting, I live in Oakland, and we had an incident in our neighborhood where somebody came with an assault weapon and shot up into the sky. And several neighbors came to me and said, "How do we reach Emma Gonzalez? We have to start sending her checks.
Tweet her.
This stuff cannot go on anymore." And Twitter is one of the few places where you can actually communicate. And I tweeted that. I said, this incident happened in my neighborhood. My neighbors want to reach Emma Gonzalez. And she responded to them on Twitter and said, "Here's how you reach our movement, and here's how you send us checks." That kind of stuff is anger, the anger over the gun laws and et cetera. But it's also movement, political movement.
It's like Malala.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so I would like to move on, and this is something I wanted to touch on. And you've already pretty kind of addressed it, Marty, but I'd love to address this full on and hear from everybody. And there's this concept of filter bubbles that we who has heard the term filter bubble, or thinks that they're they're not getting the full story on Facebook because of what they click on and the algorithm and all that stuff. It's it's so accepted, it seems to me, as part of our discourse now that this exists, but it sounds like part of what you're saying is we don't really know. And in my I had to write a paper on algorithms last semester, and not at any level I'm not a researcher, not at any level you guys, but I started reading all these studies, and I was
I just play one on TV.
I was this seems like there's no proof that filter bubbles are having any real effect. And if you notice in my questions, I put it in quotes because I'm really interested in exploring this. We talk about it as accepted fact. There's been books written on it, but is this a real thing? Is it affecting our discourse, and is it affecting how we actually vote? I have seen no evidence.
So Bill Dutton, Professor Bill Dutton, who was here on the Annenberg faculty years ago, then went to help found the Oxford Internet Institute and now is at Michigan, recently wrote an article. And the title of the article is "Fake News, Echo Chambers, and Filter Bubbles, Under-Researched and Overhyped."
Okay, perfect.
And his point, his data point, is that when 2/3 of people use the search function, like Google, to find news stories, rather than using the sites that they are, according to the filter bubble frame, encapsulated in. They go to search, and when they do search, especially if the algorithms have been tweaked the way they have, they get a mix of opinion built into that search.
Right.
And Jeff Cole, who runs the Center for the Digital Future here at USC, who's been studying the internet for 15 years, something like that, he has data that suggests that even young people now will use big name news sources as a shortcut for valid information. So kids will go to Google. It goes back to my thing. When's the last time you went to Facebook and searched for anything, right? Other than a friend. But you go to Google, everybody does, and you search, and even kids will say, oh, New York Times, that's probably true. I'll click on that. And so we are seeing that more and more.
Facebook today, and you have been online many times in the past couple hours. It sounds like Carla. I just
More
want to
than we
point
have.
that out. Facebook today released a button, which more like a widget, which will appear in searches when you look for something, and it will take you to maps of who is forwarding this, what are the other things that source has published. So it's giving you, and God help us, the Wikipedia article about the publisher.
Right.
Which
YouTube is also like
Right.
Wikipedia, and Wikipedia was like, thanks for letting us know.
Yeah,
Like,
but this is their attempt to kind of do damage control before
Yes. That's
right.
their people go before Congress, right? Because they haven't been good about sharing what they do
Well,
and how they do it.
And by the way, it was not a problem really until the Cambridge Analytica situation, because it's funny, if you go back, when you look at digital stuff, you see how things emerge for one purpose and then they get repurposed. So for example, remember back when you could create a web page, and if it's for blue widgets, if you invisibly write the word blue widget 1,000 times, then Google would find you first. So there have been all these tricks. Sometimes they'll call them black hat techniques or tricks to get Google to find you first. Okay, it's called search engine optimization. And now it's based primarily on legitimate content. Are you actually providing what you say and what people are looking for? But there are all these black hat tactics. And one of them used to be, but Google doesn't allow it anymore, that you put your website and your topic and your basic information into a service, and the service generates a whole bunch of fake sites. They generate press releases and fake news sites that are standalone, and they link to you. And the reason that they did that was because linking into you was a key thing that Google was using at the time. So Google doesn't let that happen anymore, but now let's roll forward many years, and we're now at Cambridge Analytica, which bought advertising. Right? They're like, let's find people who are passionate about this, who have a history of clicking on this, sharing this, and liking this, and using these keywords. And now let's create news that supports this candidate or that perspective or whatever. And in addition to doing the little box, the sponsored story that nobody clicks on, let's also make their internet world have a whole bunch of recommended stories that pop up outside of Facebook that are the same story or that support it. And so people are like, oh, that thing I didn't click on, I keep seeing references to it. There seems to be a groundswell of support for that topic. It must be real news because so many people have written about it. But it's not so many people. It's one company creating a bunch of fake stories that are all based on the same information and then just posting them but they're ads. And people don't get that.
So, Marty, you brought up Wikipedia and Facebook's new, look, how to assess whether something's credible. Part of that is looking at the Wikipedia page about it. But as we know, Wikipedia is a crowdsourced site, and it can be infiltrated, much like Facebook and Twitter and other social platforms have been infiltrated. And then YouTube, again, at South by Southwest, the CEO said, we're going to, try to, give you more information with Wikipedia. And they didn't even let Wikipedia know. And so given the nature of Wikipedia, and I'm a journalism professor, and, when I'm working with students on stories, they got something from Wikipedia, that's not good enough. That's not a source for a story, right? Right, Carla?
Yes.
So
You hear
I'm
it all
like,
the time, but I read it on the
as a
internet.
journalism professor, I'm going, okay, really? And then I'm also saying, is this the next battlefield?
No, you want to know what the next battlefield
Yeah,
is? It's much worse than that.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Do you know the term Deepfakes? So if you don't,
Is this like deep state? But
yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Well, it's related, and you're about not to sleep so well. The technology now exists to create anything on the internet. So you can create a fake Google, a fake YouTube. You can make any video of anything with anybody saying anything. All that technology is now available. It's a little clunky, but it's getting better and better all the time, so that you will literally not be able to trust your eyes and ears, and when you go to verify, they will have gamed the places that you're going to verify and have them confirm back to what you're doing. And so now it's a race between the people who have made that deep fakery technology and the people who are looking for ways that cannot be foiled to inspect this stuff and see whether it's authentic. The other solution to this is media literacy and critical thinking, setting aside all the issues of getting an effective such program into the curriculum and even knowing if it is effective. Even if you have those skills, that technology is so sophisticated that it will be a constant race between them.
Yeah, and I have to say that for a media person, this creates even more of a challenge, because now we don't know what's true and what's not. And it's being used against us. I had a story recently about a legislator in Sacramento who had a kegerator in her office. That's a keg refrigerator, and we had a video of a picture of it. And I heard some of her supporters were suggesting this was a made up, manufactured video because of exactly what you said, Marty. I mean, it was real, but the fact is that how do you prove now? It's getting more and more difficult.
And by the way, I mean, we are, this is not only true of this day and age when we're bombarded by information, but roll back to any point of time in your life at any age. And the question is, do you really have the time and inclination to investigate everything that you see? Right. Because none of us do. Sometimes you just want to go to Wikipedia because you just want to know how old that person is or what movie they were in or whatever it is, and you don't want to know whether or not somebody made a fake page. You just want to know that. Yeah. And if it's wrong, it's wrong. And we live most of our lives. It's why stereotyping exists. Stereotyping is not to be, to make like derogatory impressions of a certain group of people. We stereotype every day. We see a kid a 20-year-old walking across campus with a backpack. You assume, based on a stereotype, that that's a college student, but you don't know that. You don't have the time to investigate everything. And so it plays into this whatever appears, and whatever appears is based on advertising. On Facebook, it's why does all that happen? Why do they manufacture this stuff, or why do they think that it's effective? Because they know when they sell ads, or they know when they get clicks, and they know when you like things. And so they try to figure out who you are and do it to sell ads. That's really the bottom line.
Right. If they can demonstrate that they have engaged you, they can charge more for you than if it's simply an exposure to an impression.
And this is where I think the internet companies are going to get heat, because we've seen Twitter try to address this. For instance, Jack Dorsey they've gotten more aggressive about getting rid of accounts that are phony accounts or abusive accounts, and they've taken some heat for doing that. And I think some of the issues you're talking about, accounts that post fake videos, maybe these guys will have to go, and Facebook will have to really come down on and really start taking. The whole thing about Facebook is all along has been, this is this free public square and everything is cool, right? But no, it's not. And now I think you're going to see Congress try to say, you've got to do something.
But you're raising it, just so you know, like just a quick aside there, you're raising a legal issue.
Yeah, and a First Amendment issue.
Well, it's not. It's only sort of a First Amendment issue, because you have the right to go in the town square and say whatever you want, but you don't have the right to come into my home or my business and say whatever you want. Right. I can have my own rules. And Twitter and Facebook and all the other YouTube are all private businesses. They have their own rules. But their safe harbor status, their not being sued status, not being arrested status, is contingent upon the fact that they are not responsible for the content. So what they do is they set explicit policies about what you can and can't do. And if they start editorializing and saying, you can say this because we think it's good for society, but you can't say that because we think it's manipulative, then they become publishers of that, and they become editors, and then they're responsible for all of the content. And that will not work. So that's the bind that they have.
The dilemma, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you think, Mark Zuckerberg was interviewed by Vox, and that was published on Monday, and he actually said something that seemed obvious, which is, for the first 10 years or so, they were just sort of naively optimistic about human nature and what that meant for the platform. And so do you think that, you talked toward the beginning, Marty, about the incentives and the economics around this. And so do you think that the social media companies, do they care? Are they having a real moral reckoning, or?
Let's start with the naively optimistic Mark Zuckerberg. Have you seen the texts of his which surfaced recently? And again, I am assuming that they're accurate. He hasn't denied them. But he described what Facebook users are for doing what they do and letting their data and attention be sold. And he called them dumb, and you can fill in the other part of the expression. So that was the naively optimistic Mark Zuckerberg. So I would say that on balance, it probably has not gone up from there.
So do you think he's been exploiting the whole? I'm not disagreeing with you, by the way.
No,
but it's
an
curious.
Open secret. It's not a secret. That's their business model.
And did they think they were going to get away with it forever, or are they? I'm just sort of trying to figure out where Facebook has been and where are they going.
They never had "Don't be evil" as their motto.
But Google's not innocent either here, though.
Right? No, exactly.
Yeah.
And that was, as it turns out, a motto as opposed to
an actual practice.
Yeah. But it's been interesting to watch because Sheryl Sandberg, who was the one who kind of developed the whole monetization model for Facebook, and she herself became kind of the queen of lean in,
right.
And think about it. Just about a year ago, we were talking about these people running for president. Mark Zuckerberg was out there, doing a listening tour of the, Nebraska, and Sheryl Sandberg was doing a million, public speaking events, and every one of them was sold out, and it was like the Church of Sheryl Sandberg. People would be coming with that Lean In book. And Peter Thiel was another one we were talking about running for public office. They were sort of the gurus, and now, now that this has all happened, I'm kind of struck at how clueless they were in terms of inability to address us. Yes,
right.
You don't think
Ferguson said this that, and I think it's true, that Orwell's 1984 telescreen is Facebook, and now it's portable, and we tell it everything. That is really true. It's on us, too. Exactly right.
But also, I was convinced, absolutely convinced, that Sheryl Sandberg was running for Senate.
Yes.
And then the nobody retired at the right time. Honestly, no, I'm serious. But if you want to,
I agree.
Here's a question for you: how many of you? This is a probing hypothetical question. How many of you saw those initial posts by Sheryl Sandberg? Because it was everybody. Yes. You know why it was everybody? Because they control what people see. So no, I'm serious. So you don't think that Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg know exactly how to manufacture a persona online? That is their business. Do you think that they don't know how to promote it? That post, how come Sheryl Sandberg's was seen more than anybody else's? Because they sent it to everybody, right?
So
it's beautifully architected.
Name another person in American public life who owns our attention and every day, 20 times a day, whipsaws our heads and makes us notice what it is that he says and does.
I have no idea.
I can think of one.
And what job does he have?
Well, yeah, so I did want to touch on, thank you. I did want to touch on this from a different perspective, which is how President Trump uses social media, and specifically Twitter, right? We're all thinking that, right? So, you've all seen the tweets, yes, the unpresidential tweet. He can't even spell unpresidential or unprecedented. That's what it was. Anyway, so there's this. Yeah, he's using Twitter to communicate with the people, to get his message out unfiltered. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what this means for our it's a new realm in political discourse, right? And so what does this mean going forward? Is this a new normal? What can we expect to see from this?
I was telling the story before this I covered Donald Trump back in 1999 when he ran for president the first time as a Reform Party candidate. And he came here to L.A. He was in his Trump one. We were traveling around with him, and it was this wild ride of, like, let's go down and hang out with Jay Leno in the green room, and, let's go to the Holocaust Museum. And, it was, you just got a sense of what a salesman the guy was. He was actually selling a book at the same time, which is why none of us thought this campaign was real, but that it was maybe about marketing. But at the end
I think
of
that's
it,
true.
and from a communications point of view, back then there was no Twitter. But after that tour was over, he actually sent me a letter on Trump stationery, which I found the other day, that said, dear Carla Marinucci, thank you so much for the fair coverage. Rich people aren't always covered fairly, and I appreciate it. And the last line of the letter says, you can interview me at any time, and he wrote in handwriting, even if you don't want it. And I was looking at this the other day and thinking, this really tells you, back then, this was 1999, how much he cared about what the media said about him back then. And now, I think today he still cares that much, but it's now. He's using the media, and it's every other tweet is about fake news and who's his friend and who's not. Pumping Fox and Friends.
Right.
Those are the people.
Not even pumping Fox and Friends as making policy from Fox and Friends.
It's almost like is Sean Hannity co-president at this point? We don't know, but that's I think to see he was always somebody who was very much concerned about the public profile, and now on Twitter, he's been able to sort of create and command this stage every day, and to our this is to our big concern. There's a shiny object that's thrown out there every day, and there's real issues that aren't getting covered because we're chasing the shiny object.
Right. Yeah. I think that's really interesting. Like, what are we not covering because we're reacting to his tweets?
Since he's the one who throws the stink bombs, what we're not paying attention to is what he doesn't want us to. That's what Professor Lakoff's point was earlier today, that he's a master of diversion, of attention. And he is, he's called a master entertainer. That's because he can get our attention. And when he brags about ratings and the way he got what we used to call free media during the campaign by being entertaining. Anyone could put a camera on an empty podium and do a decent share on the ratings because people were anticipating something outrageous. And each of the things that we look for in a movie and a melodrama, we were finding in him. You had asked, we had some email correspondence before about kids and what we say to kids.
Oh, right.
What?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I've heard people talking about Trump's tweets and saying, when he has this rhetoric that we won't really embrace as a country or doesn't seem align with our values, that it makes it harder to say to our kids when the president is doing it. It makes it harder to say, please don't talk like that. You can't talk like that. That's not nice. And so I'm thinking, the original formulation of the question to the panel is this an overreaction to these tweets, or is this something that is having long-term effects on our political rhetoric?
Wait, can I just jump in for a second? Okay, so here's, I could spend hours talking about him and social media. It's fascinating to me. And I start by the way saying that I don't think he ever thought he was going to win. I think he just wanted to stir the pot. And I kind of blame the Huffington Post because the day after he announced, they said that they would never cover him as news, only as entertainment, and that made him more newsworthy. And then I blame the Republican Party, who, when he won the delegates, announced that they found a loophole in their own bylaws and that they can overthrow the will of the voters by getting to a second ballot and getting somebody else. And then he went to war, I think, with his own party, or with that party. It's not even a party he's been a member of for long. And that's when all these fringe people got together with him. So I think there's this crazy, long, convoluted history that allowed him not only to get to the White House when and because he got so much free, or unpaid coverage, and also that got him to the far fringe right where he had never been before. But that said, now I'm going to blame the press just to be provocative. But
ahead.
how many people are on Twitter? Because I'll tell you honestly, Twitter is a very small community of people. And every time Twitter has its quarterly reports, their stock drops because they never, ever, ever make their target for growth, because they're supposed to be this big behemoth social network, but they're not. What are they? They're an information network. They are a network of influencers and communicators. It's every journalist and every person who has an audience, not every, but people have audiences and they want to talk. And so when people go on Twitter, they don't speak directly to most of us. They speak to people who speak to their audiences, like every journalist, okay? And it's amazing to me that Donald Trump says things on, I worked for the Clinton administration. We had our own issues, just so especially the first couple of years when I was there. But we had trouble getting the press to cover the things that the president said at times. This president, I don't know what would happen at a news conference versus Twitter, but if he tweets something, journalists cover it. You can't not have it. If he doesn't tweet, it becomes news that he didn't tweet that day.
Yes.
So somehow the world of journalism has bought into the idea that Twitter is the most, or like one of the most newsworthy sources, and then people buy into it as being more authentic because it came from him, or it's unfiltered, or I don't know what.
But it
that's
is
crazy.
official. It is an official statement from
Yes,
the president.
but
So
we
you
tried
can't-
to do
so-
official statements and nobody covered them when I was
Yeah,
at the
no,
White
but
House.
I understand, and I think I will say that a story that came out in Fast Company today says that Twitter's daily usage is up 12%.
Yeah,
and in
it's
fact,
great for them.
They did report their first quarterly profit this year, and
Ever.
ever, and they've got 330 million users. But let's be real. The number one Twitter account in the world. Does anybody know who it is? Katy Perry. The top five. Well,
those aren't most
Barack
influential.
Obama is in the top five.
But those are not most influential. Those are most followers.
Most
just so you
followers.
know.
And I think this is where, when you get to politics, the whole issue of, we tend to go, Gavin Newsom has 1.5 million Twitter followers, but that doesn't necessarily translate into votes or donors,
Right.
Or press coverage.
Or press coverage, right? And with Trump, he has half of the Twitter followers of Barack Obama, but we're not covering Barack Obama's every statement on Twitter, right?
Right,
Nor did you ever.
And because his statements were more expected of a president,
Well, you don't know
where
that.
Trump's aren't.
I'm going to go back to Marty's comment that that's what we assume, but we don't know. We don't know why people do it. It's just that that's what people do. We don't know whether it's more influential.
Yeah.
We don't know. We just know that right now the practice is that every single day, every single tweet from Donald Trump is reported, and if he doesn't tweet, we report that too.
There was a legal case that ended up with a ruling that his tweets are official statements.
Yes.
And there's some site, I wish I could remember which one, which after that, every time he does a tweet,
That's right.
they put it on official White House stationery.
Yeah.
Right.
Just so you can see what it looks like.
Right. Okay. So this is, we could talk about this for a long time.
Forever,
It's a
yes.
great conversation, but I want to give the audience to get in on some of this. Sorry, give the audience a chance to get in on some of this. So we're going to move on to Q&A for about 15 minutes.
Hi, Carla. Al Ramirez.
Oh, hi.
I just want to say that Carla does write the truth. Thank you. I tweet her all the time.
Thank you, Al.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Al Ramirez. If you don't know me, it's because you don't read Carla's article and playbook. I ran for the United States Senate 3 times. I only lost twice. The third time I quit, so I wouldn't lose. Quit while I was ahead is what my dad said. But, I come from the tech industry, and in the mid-'90s, I worked for a fiber company. We were one of the first companies to go out putting fiber. And we got bought by WorldCom. And then all of a sudden, I went from doing deals to working on what we call, like in the movie The Firm, sweat files. Oh, we got this orders, all these capacity. You got to design these networks. Oh, they're canceling that, but that's okay. Here's another order.
Right.
Fast forward, I go to work for another company. We take them public. Some of the things that they did then, exactly with the swaps. Oh, we're going to price it at 7, but we already know that these people, we're telling them we're going to sell it at 13. It was called laddering. Oh, and the next people are going to buy it at 17, and the next ones are going to buy it at 21. And then we'll come back and buy it again when it drops at 6. So, and then Wells Fargo, the fake accounts. So one of the things when I ran the first time was I got accused because I have 168,000 Twitter followers, and I got them because I was put on the SUL. Right. Twitter made the decision, Al's interesting. I got accused of fake followers. I never bought any. I never generated them. I didn't make that decision. The NRSC didn't make that decision. So what's the difference between what these social media companies are doing and then, you know, deciding what you're going to see? Of course everybody's going to see Cheryl's message. What's the difference between what they're doing, and we've seen it with Snap being accused of fake, you know, right, accounts and jacking up their numbers. What's the difference between Google, YouTube suppressing viewers, Twitter, Snapchat, all these companies? What's the difference between what they're doing, Wells Fargo, you know, WorldCom, Enron? They all lied. Why? To reflect better statements to their shareholders. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what's the difference, and what should be done? Should they be with Bernie Ebbers in jail? You know, is that going to be the next thing?
I mean, you know, you have to look at what you're saying is true, but, you know, the answer to that, there's a great quote from Ron Reagan Jr. years ago that's, it's easy to say a soundbite. It takes about an hour to explain the nuances of it, or, you know, in his case, he was talking about what wasn't true. But, you know, so, you know, if you want to think about human behavior has been pretty much the same from the time of early hominids until now, and to the beyond the foreseeable future. So you're right, it's the same. The question is, in situations like that, what's legal and what's illegal, okay? So, for example, the Russian meddling, whatever you want to call it, was probably legal. I only say probably because I'm not a lawyer, and I wouldn't want somebody out there to accuse me of practicing law, but it seems to be legal. It's buying ads, okay? So, you know, so there are things that are legal and there are things that are illegal. Some of these things, is creating a fake account legal? Probably. Is buying followers legal? Probably. It depends. It depends whether you are in an environment where making claims is illegal or whatever. But that's, to answer your question, what they're doing is in many ways not any different, but there are nuances in terms of what's legal and not, what's ethical and not.
Right.
And if you're trying to start a YouTube account, or for example, there used to be a practice in music especially that they would, before they had verified accounts, a music label would release a song, and it would be a big name person, and they'd want Google to find that song, but Google finds it in part based on how many hits it has or how many views. And so they would buy views so that it starts out with 100,000 or 1 million views, not to trick people, but to make sure that it was the verified account before they verified things. Is that illegal? Is it even unethical? It was just a way to help consumers find the thing they were actually looking for, even though it was a little devious.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a little bit off the, you know, exactly what you were asking, but I think these companies are also looking at the accounts and how they're used in a negative way. Like I can think of Twitter closed down accounts after Leslie Jones at Saturday Night Live got a tremendous amount of like negative, nasty, you know, life-threatening kind of stuff. Robin Williams' daughter, Zelda, also got a lot of that. They closed down those accounts. And I think of Richard Spencer, the white supremacist, they closed down his account. I think, you know, there's a real challenge for these companies to figure out how to manage the information without, you know, stepping on First Amendment, but at the same time, you know, like when you've got political campaigns, you're right. They're being accused of placing bets on certain campaigns, and that's something I think that they have yet to deal with.
And by the way, spewing hatred is generally legal also, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm, yeah, right.
But inciting violence is not. And so they usually get them. I mean, I've always wondered this with like the protests in like Charlottesville and those areas,
right,
that, you know, you can make all the arguments you want about neo-Nazis being able to spew hate speech and the First Amendment rights, where they actually do have a First Amendment right there. But inciting violence is always illegal. I just never understand why they don't just walk up and arrest them for inciting violence.
Well, and, you know, we just had yesterday this tragic case on YouTube, the mass shooter at YouTube, who was a 38-year-old woman who's a prolific YouTube user, and very disgruntled because of
We don't know.
they weren't monetizing her account.
We don't know that for sure. I just was talking to Time Magazine about this an hour ago, and the thing is that first it was a domestic dispute, then it was a terrorist thing, and then it's this YouTube thing. Nobody knows. This is where we're way out ahead of the actual facts. We don't know. Now people, they're trying to write articles now about how people are stereotyping her as a Muslim. But here's the thing. It's probably not terrorism. It's probably the YouTube cracking down on her account.
I think her
but,
father.
But we don't know. But nobody knows yet. So we don't know. I just always think it's better to hold back.
No,
But they,
it's a very good point.
but they are stopping people for the violence.
Report that, that she was coming up to do some damage there, but
Maybe.
yeah,
I mean, probably.
But you're right. There's
We
been
don't know.
various sort of.
And how did she
issues.
get in? Because I'll tell you, if you want to go to the devious social media thing, I don't know how she got on campus, but you and I couldn't get on campus. We couldn't just walk in. But people with huge followings usually have handlers. Like there's an office in Beverly Hills that handles people with big followings on YouTube. And they help them monetize their account, and they advise them. And my guess is that with her following, she was probably on a list of people who could walk
Well,
on
I think
campus.
this is going to be a concern in Silicon Valley because a lot of these campuses, if you've been to Google or Facebook, or Apple's got the new, satellites. Facebook. They're like open places. You can walk onto the campus, not so much inside the buildings, but it's available to just walk onto these places. I think they've got to be concerned about that aspect of it.
Right. Okay. I'm going to move on to the next question. You had a hand up? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
you.
Right there in the blue. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh. Okay. Go ahead. Got it.
Thinking historically, periods of big technological change and disruption have occasioned, after looking at the unintended consequences of the new technologies, regulation. And my question is, if you were called in or called to DC to say, is there a viable premise for defining public interest? And are there meaningful ways that these new technologies can and should be regulated that will serve the public interest? How would you approach that?
Well, this is not a frontal answer, but I think there is something that public policy can and should do which would serve as a check on that power, and that is to create a mechanism to subsidize local journalism all over the country. That the more sources of information, of quality information that we have, the more the internet is contained or at least relativized. And your idea of how public, I mean, the public subsidizes journalism already by requiring notices to be placed in newspapers of property sales and that kind of thing. And we do it through postal rates. So we're already in that business. I just think that the more that we can do to help traditional real journalism succeed, we will demonstrate by practice what the alternatives are to this entertainment vehicle and this advertising vehicle, which looks like news.
How can we have that where people can be anonymous and fake accounts creating information is totally unrestrained?
So, I mean, keep in mind that the problem that we're facing is that unlike broadcasting the news, these are private businesses, so they can play by their own rules, and we're not subject to this. We opt into it. And so they're not regulated. In fact, I totally agree with you, and I'm always happy to see the data that suggests that people are now shortcutting by looking for big name, newspapers or news sources, because that means that people do care, at least some. But these are private businesses, and they can do what they want as long as they don't break the law or break their own terms and conditions. I think that one thing that will help, and Google led the way on this, even though they're not getting a lot of credit for it, is with the fake news. What people don't usually understand is that it doesn't show up as news. It shows up as ads. And so Google was the first to say, they have the beautiful luxury of being able to say that their business model is to give you what you seek. You go there to search for something, and they do better, they make more money if they find you what you're actually looking for, as opposed to Facebook, which does not have that mandate, okay? And but what we don't do with the internet, which we do with newspapers and radio and TV, is we don't have any statements. There's no mandatory statement of who purchased the ad or sponsored it or whether or not it's true or endorsed by a candidate, right? So whether it's election or otherwise, I mean, fake news, what if it said paid for by the Kremlin? It would be far less persuasive, right? Wouldn't it? Yeah. I would think. So that kind of regulation, which doesn't make them do anything, it just allows for more transparency, I think is where we need to go.
And I think we have a question right next.
It's funny because it was similar in a way, which was what steps, just as consumers, can we take to not in a regulatory way or a protectionist way, but how can we actually leverage social media then to our advantage and flip it to leverage the technology and leverage the ability to connect in a way that's positive and might have a positive influence on the state of the country.
Isn't that your closing question?
Yeah, I was going to say you're kind of getting to the last 15 minutes are reserved for hope. So maybe we can address that in the closing. I think we have one more question right here.
There's one over there too.
Okay, we probably do him and then go there, and then we gotta get on to hope. Oh, last question. I'm sorry. He had put his hand up. I'm sorry.
Sure. This is, I guess, for Carla. I have friends in the tech industry who have said things about Facebook, and I don't know if they're true, but it would be very interesting to find out. What they've said is that Facebook tended to hire people who had undergraduate degrees in computer science and have them program as fast as possible, and then to find out where the break came, and then get somebody else to try to patch it and have that break it and then patch that. What they said was when you do that, that means you have what are called holes in your programming, and that one of the reasons that Cambridge Analytica could get through was the fact that there were these holes there. Is this true? Because that was part of the business plan in terms of hiring people and in terms of getting as many users as possible, as fast as possible, by doing this, hiring these people and having them program as fast as possible and then patch and patch and patch.
Right.
And if that's true, can they stop such infiltration? Because the whole thing is set up to allow it.
But it's, I mean, hindsight's 20/20. Right? I mean, the thing is that nobody saw this coming, so
right.
They didn't. It's not the holes; it's that they flat out allowed these things to happen because they didn't see the implications.
I know, but the question is, can they fix it? Yeah. Because if all of their programming was set up that way, can they have a wall around it? I mean, what would they do to fix it if that's the case? And I don't know if that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, there are some that suggest that. Facebook may not be around, and that right now there is no company that exactly does what Facebook does. But there are some that are suggesting in the tech industry that this is sort of a look ahead, that we're seeing maybe the height of Facebook's power and reach, and that maybe there's going to be something else out there. The Valley is a very competitive place, and it's kind of amazing that Mark Zuckerberg has been the head of this company for almost half of his life, and is a guy who has changed the world, in doing so. But this whole event with Cambridge Analytica is a major black mark on him, and he hasn't shown, at least so far, I think, the ability to, or at least the inclination to aggressively address it. And maybe that's going to change. But
And by the way, I don't think Cambridge Analytica didn't do anything. They didn't exploit like a programming error. They just got in and they just basically bought access and took data and they exploited it.
Right.
I don't know.
I think,
I mean, they mostly just need to change the rules, which they're doing, for who can get data and who can buy ads in what ways. Like, it's really a very simple, it's like
And
a
how they protect
policy. It's more
consumers,
of a
and how they
policy
protect
than a
consumers,
programming issue.
Yeah, so let's move forward to, let's move on to how we can move forward.
So there's two people.
I'm being cut off.
Okay.
We've talked about the motivations that the companies, the social media companies have, as well as people's motivations for being on these social networks. So is there a way that these things can be leveraged for good? And how can we leave the audience with hope here?
Well, I just want to say, but to the question, how can we have hope? I think people have to support good media outlets, and not just, Politico, I think it has done a tremendous amount of great reporting, and we have, all kinds of newsletters and other things that help us support great journalism. But it involves like subscribing to your local papers, not just reading them free. They have to be supported. We're watching here in California the local newspapers being absolutely decimated. I mean, to the point of insanity. And people have got to, if we want to have hope about it, I think people have got to subscribe and support these outlets.
So I have two things for hope. One is the result of an experiment using Facebook as a vehicle to get people to register to vote and to vote. And in this experiment, they tried 3 different methods. One was the cyber version of those little I voted stickers, so appealing to civic duty. That had no effect on people. They tried using praise, saying something nice if you have voted, and they found that 16% of people were moved by that. The big success of getting people to act was shame. You didn't vote. 24% were motivated to vote. But
one thing they didn't try was point out that everyone votes either at the polls for what they believe in
or not.
Or against.
Right.
voting for the other side.
Right. Yeah. So they did not do that. You're absolutely right. But just for comparison, standard political get out the vote techniques, knocking on doors or mailers, their typical results are 3 to 8%. So that is a way to engage the civic responsibility. The other is, and I saw this on my Twitter feed, and I followed it up.
Must be true.
And it actually turned out to be true, because this is a job posting on Facebook's employment opportunities section. And it's for a user interface researcher in the area of news technology integrity. And what the position description is: to develop and maintain expertise in politics, polarization, civil discourse, news, journalism, and misinformation, and related media, social science research, both academic and market insights. So I'm glad that they're hiring in that area.
All right.
Let me make one comment about the positive hope thing.
Please do.
You know, we are all totally up in arms about Facebook and Twitter and everything else because people are a little shocked by either the results of the election. Republicans and Democrats are sort of like, how did that happen? Nobody saw it coming. and then by the way that news is being conveyed in Cambridge Analytica. But let's remember that this is a tiny piece of what happens when people go onto their digital devices, and that for the most part, digital devices allow us to stay connected to each other. And the one that I always go to is that it allows people who have an esoteric interest or health concern or worry find like-minded or helpful people somewhere in the world that they could never find in their own communities. And they could find them anonymously or openly. That's my positive thing, is that overall it provides opportunities that do not exist anywhere else.
Yeah, and I will say real quickly, I think this younger generation, to watch David Hogg's Twitter campaign against Laura Ingraham, in the sense of enough of the uncivil discourse. We can't go at each other like this anymore. We can be, it's not about being Republican or Democrat. We just have to have a civil discourse, and to have, just watch the power that had to, over just a period of a few days. I think this younger generation has really sort of gotten it in terms of, and maybe they are saying enough, a line in the sand on how the attacks and the uncivil discourse on social media, and maybe that's a turning point.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think we've reached a turning point? Would it be naive to think that?
I think it's too soon to say, but I have to say that, I mean, I thought it was an amazing development. That 12 or 14 major advertisers in the space of a few days said her comments were out of line and absolutely unacceptable. And I think other broadcasters and other folks on social media have got to be watching that. And that may be a line in the sand.
Karen?
I mean, I'm not that optimistic, but it's only because I met my husband banning Chinese assault weapons, just saying, like, weapon bans are my thing. I hate guns. But that said, these kids are very passionate, and rightfully so, about something that I happen to be passionate about too. And when people speak badly or critically about victims or about kids, it's just mean, and that's a wake up. People don't like that. But at the same time, that's the same generation that has, Logan Paul and some others. I mean, it's a generation being raised to try to portray their lives or their interests in an entertaining way, positive or negative. So it's not you. I'm glad to hear that. Excellent. We should talk. But the thing is that it's, the thing that I like about this particular issue is, just like Cambridge Analytica was a wake-up call to business owners in digital, this situation is a wake-up call to kids and to political speakers who are very polarized, that, hang on a second, let's remember that we're dealing with real people and real tragedies or real lives. Yeah. So I hope it makes a difference.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you to the panelists. This has been a great discussion.
We'll reconvene for our final panel on media wars and culture wars in about 15 minutes. In the meantime, get some